The reason for that is that an authoritarian system would want to teach obedience and conformity. An authoritarian system would want kids to be conforming and obedient. But a democratic system would want to create citizens capable of asking important questions, right? And the pedagogy of questioning can come from anywhere. Two quick examples. One profound and one kind of banal. The profound one first. Charlie Cobb, who was a civil rights volunteer in the early 1960s, wrote a proposal in 1963 for what he called freedom schools. And it was a proposal, it was a one-page proposal. And unlike today when proposals are written to the Education Department or the Ford Foundation, this was a proposal written to his friends. And in it, Cobb said, "The black children of Mississippi have been denied many things. They've been denied fully trained teachers, forward-looking curriculum, and adequate facilities. But the fundamental injury is that they've been denied the right to think for themselves about the conditions of their lives and how they might be otherwise." Think about that. They've been denied the right to think for themselves about the conditions of their lives and how they might be otherwise. You could say that about a lot of the schooling you guys went through. You weren't really encouraged to think about how did I get here, who am I, where am I going, what kind of person am I becoming. But in Mississippi in 1963, that was a revolutionary idea. And if you don't think so, remember Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were murdered. Two of them were freedom school teachers. All of them had just been to investigate the site of an arson bombing of a freedom school. So that was something that had consequences, had real consequences. So the freedom school curriculum that was developed, and I had the good fortune of participating in it in the next year, the freedom school curriculum that was developed was a curriculum of questioning. So the opening question, why are we involved in the freedom movement? What is it that we want? What does the majority culture that we would have that we would like to have? What do we have that we want to keep? And you can find this online, the 1964 Mississippi Freedom School Curriculum. It's well worth reading. It's short, but it really gets into this question of what it means to be a citizen. And those questions that I just recited don't have easy answers. They're not something that have the same answers for all. Okay, that's a more profound example. Let me give you a banal example. Some of you know that do you know who Governor Huckabee is, right? Before he was presidential candidate and a national figure, he was the governor of Arkansas, and he was well known as kind of the poster boy for losing weight. Did you know that? Yes. Yeah, he weighed something like 340 pounds or something. He lost 130 pounds or something. And so he is, and he was then and he is now, an advocate against obesity in schools and against obesity in young people, and that's a good thing. But the state of Arkansas passed a rule in their schools that every report card would report the body mass index of its students. Yeah, some of you are groaning, exactly. Well, I groan, and the reason I groan is because you kind of wonder. Imagine bringing home your report card, A in English, B in math, C in history, and a body mass index of fat. You know, it's like, wow. And what am I supposed to do with that information, incidentally? But going back to the pedagogy of questioning, wouldn't it be interesting as a teacher in Arkansas to say, okay, I'm not going to risk my job, I'll report the BMI, but I'll also make the BMI an object of study. So I might ask the kind of questions that one would ask. First of all, who thought of this idea of the BMI being the report card, and what's the history of these kinds of reforms changing behavior? Like we have pregnancy prevention in the curriculum, or we have alcohol awareness in the curriculum. What's the history of that? Or we might ask, what's happened to physical education in the Arkansas schools? Or what's the condition of the parks in the neighborhoods? Or who has the contract to bring in the school lunch? And how nutritious is the school lunch? Now, frankly, I don't know the answers to any of those questions, but it still would be a worthwhile exercise to ask those questions, because they're the kind of questions that get us thinking about the world, not as something that we receive passively, but something that we participate in actively. And that active participation is a huge part of what it means to educate for citizenship, what it means to educate in a democracy. I think that we have to wonder about how we're doing as democratic, as a school system or schools educating for democracy. I think we have to challenge ourselves to rethink that, and I think we have to challenge ourselves to demand that in a society like this, with the wealth that we have, with the possibilities we have, that we can do better than we've done in terms of funding, in terms of realizing a democratic vision. So I have 10 quick steps that are implications for, rethinking, reframing this. First, equitable funding. We need to fight for equitable funding for our schools. There's no reason that we don't. We could also imagine an urban public school bailout, as long as we're in the bailout mood. Let's bail out urban public schools. When President Obama talks about green jobs and jobs to build the infrastructure, he does mention, and we should demand, that the infrastructure of schools is rebuilt. There's no reason that in Chicago we have schools that look like laboratories for learning and palaces on the hill for some kids, and schools that look like prisons and factories for other kids. It's not fair. It's not worthy of us as members of a democracy. We ought to create the Ella Baker, Septima Clark Teacher Corps, where we take parents and unemployed people and teach them to be teachers' assistants. And there's no reason that we can't do that. If you want to have a jobs program, have the jobs program, invest in education. Let's get people into the schools. Let's get neighborhood folks into the schools in a place like Chicago. Let's imagine restorative justice in every school, not zero tolerance, not pushing kids out who need schools, but restorative justice. Let's end selling off of the public space to private vendors, and let's develop, as I said, the notion of a pedagogy of questioning. And finally, let's pay off the education debt. A lot of people talk about the education gap between black and white students or between poor and middle class students. I think of it more as a debt. That is, years and years, decades and decades of underfunding, 22 generations of slavery, does a lot to a people. Generations of apartheid does a lot to a people. So you think about Native American education, immigrant education, education for large numbers of African Americans in the South and in rural areas and in the cities, and that really grows as a debt. So finding a way to be equitable, not always equal, but equitable, this, it seems to me, is our challenge. And this, it seems to me, is something that's worthy of us and something we ought to participate in fully and universally. Thanks very much. So, we can take questions. So where are the mics? Oh, you're going to set up the mics? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's get on with talking. Thanks. Let's have a conversation. So where are the mics that people can come up to?
We're going to set up here.
Okay. Anybody who would like to, please come up and make a comment, ask a question, be respectful of everyone in the room except me. No need to be respectful of me. I'm okay. But definitely come up and speak into the microphone and ask a question. If you don't want to be televised, that's okay too. And as I said, we'll keep this going as long as you're interested in, and if you'd like to ask questions after the formal part ends, you can stick around. Okay, onward.